President Reagan wrote an important letter on August 7, 1982. It wasn't a letter to anyone in Congress or to a leader of another country. Nor was it a letter of political significance. It was a letter to his wife's father. It was very personal and of utmost importance. The First Lady's father, Loyal Davis, was in declining health and only days away from death. Davis had achieved prominence in his life. He has been credited with being the founder of the field of neurosurgery and a founding member of the American Board of Surgery. On August 7th, President Reagan was not remembering his father-in-law's worldly successes. He was rightly worried about the condition of his soul, knowing that Davis had once written of his unbelief in Jesus. I have never been able to subscribe to the divinity of Jesus Christ nor his virgin birth. I don't believe in his resurrection or heaven or hell as places. If we are remembered and discussed with pleasure and happiness after death, this is our heavenly reward. President Reagan is well remembered as a faithful believer in Jesus. He knew that the day of judgment, death, was coming soon for his father-in-law. So, early in the morning of August 7, 1982, President Reagan wrote in his diary, "More of Saturday's work plus a long letter I have to write to Loyal. I'm afraid for him. His health is failing badly." Later that day, the 40th President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, set aside all his worldly duties to attend to the spiritual condition of his father-in-law's soul. With love and concern, he wrote the following letter.
Dear Loyal, I hope you'll forgive me for this, but I've been wanting to write you ever since we talked on the phone. I am aware of the strain you are under, and believe with all my heart there is help for that. First, I want to tell you of a personal experience I've kept to myself for a long time. During my first year as governor, you'll recall the situation I found in California was almost as bad as the one in Washington today. It seemed as if the problems were endless and insolvable. Then, I found myself with an ulcer. In all those years at Warner Brothers, no one had been able to give me an ulcer, and I felt ashamed as if it were a sign of weakness on my part. John Sharp had me on Maalox, and I lived with a constant pain that ranged from discomfort to extremely sharp attacks. This went on for months. I had a bottle of Maalox in my desk, my briefcase, and of course, at home. Then one morning I got up, went into the bathroom, reached for the bottle as always, and something happened. I knew I didn't need it. I had gone to bed with the usual pain the night before. But I knew that morning I was healed. The Maalox went back on the shelf. That morning, when I arrived at the office, Helene brought me my mail. The first letter I opened was from a lady, a stranger, in the southern part of the state. She had written to tell me she was one of a group who met every day to pray for me. Believe it or not, the second letter was from a man, again a stranger, in the other end of the state, telling me he was part of a group that met weekly to pray for me. Within the hour, a young fellow from the legal staff came into my office on some routine matter. On the way out, he paused in the door and said, "Gov, I think maybe you'd like to know, some of us on the staff come in early every morning and get together to pray for you. Coincidence? I don't think so." A couple of weeks later, Nancy and I went down to L.A. and had our annual checkup. John Sharp, a little puzzled, told me I no longer had an ulcer, but added there was no indication I'd ever had one. Word of honor. I never told him about that particular day in Sacramento. There is a line in the Bible, "Wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there will I be also." Loyal, I know of your feeling, your doubt. But could I just impose on you a little longer? Some 700 years before the birth of Christ, the ancient Jewish prophets predicted the coming of a Messiah. They said he would be born in a lowly place, would proclaim himself the Son of God, and would be put to death for saying that. All in all, there were a total of 123 specific prophecies about his life, all of which came true. Crucifixion was unknown in those times, yet it was foretold that he would be nailed to a cross of wood, and one of the predictions was that he would be born of a virgin. Now I know that is probably the hardest for you as a doctor to accept. The only answer that can be given is a miracle. But loyal, I don't find that as great a miracle as the actual history of his life. Either he was who he said he was, or he was the greatest faker and charlatan who ever lived. But would a liar and faker suffer the death he did when all he had to do to save himself was admit he'd been lying? The miracle is that a young man of 30 years without credentials as a scholar or priest began preaching on street corners. He owned nothing but the clothes on his back, and he didn't travel beyond a circle less than 100 miles across. He did this for only 3 years and then was executed as a common criminal. But for 2,000 years, he has had more impact on the world than all the teachers, scientists, emperors, generals, and admirals who ever lived, all put together. The Apostle John said, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believed in him would not perish, but have everlasting life." We have been promised that all we have to do is ask God in Jesus' name to help when we have done all we can, when we've come to the end of our strength and abilities, and we'll have that help. We only have to trust and have faith in his infinite goodness and mercy. Loyal, you and Edith have known a great love, more than many have been permitted to know. That love will not end with the end of this life. We've been promised this is only a part of life, and that a greater life, a greater glory, awaits us. It awaits you together one day, and all that is required is that you believe and tell God you put yourself in his hands. Love, Ronnie.
Did Loyal Davis come to faith? No one can say for certain. However, 2 days before his death, Davis asked to see the hospital chaplain who prayed with him. Nancy Reagan reported noticing a change in him, saying he was calmer and not as frightened, and later claimed that she believed her father did turn to God before death. Was this a deathbed conversion? Perhaps, and of course we hope it was, but only God knows. What we do know is that President Reagan was loving and concerned enough to share the gospel with someone who desperately needed it. President Reagan's faith was not a political tool used to appeal to Christian voters. His faith was a reflection of who he was, a son of God and a follower of Jesus, who gave the command that we preach the gospel. President Reagan did that, and so should we.